So as of today, the New York Knicks have officially clinched the number 2 spot in the Eastern Conference heading into the playoffs next week. They have home court advantage for the first two rounds, which is absolutely huge. If you've ever been to an NBA game, even in the regular season, you see very quickly how much home court advantage means. Right now, think about that as a regular season game. Now translate that over to the playoffs. Not only just the playoffs, but playing in Madison Square Garden, which right now is extremely tough to play in, because guess what? Knicks fans know they have a really, really, really good team, right? This is the first time in a long time where they come into the postseason expecting New York to get super deep into the playoffs. It's not like 2021 where they were good. We didn't really expect them to be that good, right? Tom Thibodeau comes in. Julius Randle has like an all-star year, and they're surprisingly great, especially defensively. And the expectations were, we're going to be good, right? We're not going to be a super, super deep playoff team. Now the expectations are very serious. Now there's this implication that they could get super deep into the postseason. And who knows, right? We're seeing with the league right now that the most talented teams aren't the ones making the NBA Finals appearances. We saw the Miami Heat, right? 2 times over the last 5 seasons have a roster that was okay, right? Jimmy Butler, Goran Dragic, a lot of different guys sprinkled in there, but they still made 2 NBA Finals appearances, especially last season. They come in as a play-in tournament team and they dominate throughout the playoffs, and they go 5 games against the Denver Nuggets. But still, they made a finals appearance with a roster that wasn't like a top 10 most talented group in the league. Saying that to say, right now, you don't know who's going to go to the NBA Finals. Right now, there is a level of unexpectedness in the NBA as far as who the teams are going to be representing both conferences in the NBA Finals this year. There's just a level of uncertainty. I think it's really good for the game because we're coming out of this era where like it was a lock for the Warriors to get to the finals every single season, or even like a few years before that with the Miami Heat, it was a lock for them to get to the playoffs or get to the Eastern Conference Finals and win the Eastern Conference Finals year in and year out. Right now, the way things are looking, nothing is guaranteed, right? We saw the most talented groups get knocked out in the Eastern Conference by the Miami Heat. The Milwaukee Bucks got knocked out in the first round by a Miami Heat team that was without Tyler Hero. And that's taking nothing away from Jimmy Butler at all. He was obviously great, and he does turn into a top 10 level player once he gets to the postseason. But I'm saying all of this to say there is a level of unexpectedness right now, and it's super good for the league because there is no one right now in either conference who is an absolute lock to get to the NBA Finals. Even the Celtics, even though they have the best record in the league and they are one of the best Celtics regular season teams of all time, they're not a lock. That favors New York, right? There is a possibility that the Knicks could disappoint a lot of really, really talented groups in the Eastern Conference. So let's take that confidence that the Knicks have right now, apply it to the fans, and that speaks to how tough it is going to be to try to beat that team in Madison Square Garden for the first 2 games for a playoff series. So let's talk a little bit about the players, especially Jalen Brunson, who has been ridiculous this year. I think this season, he's been playing the best basketball out of any point guard just this season. I'm not saying he's better than Steph Curry, I'm not saying he's better than a bunch of guys, but this year he's been playing the best point guard basketball, right? Like in 2017, Russ is the league MVP. He's playing the best basketball out of anybody that season. Does that mean he was better than Stephen Curry? No. So same thing applies here to Jalen Brunson. He has been lights out, had yet another 30-point performance against the Chicago Bulls today to help clinch that second seed in the Eastern Conference. Did it with one of the best point of attack defenders in Alex Caruso on him. Absolutely cooked that Chicago Bulls defense and the clutch. That's been one of the best clutch defenses in the entire league as of late. And Doris Burke made a very interesting point in the broadcast that pissed a lot of people off on Twitter, but I actually somewhat agree. She said that if the Knicks end up winning the game, which they did, and if the Knicks end up taking that number 2 spot against the Bucks, which they did, then we would have to consider putting Jalen Brunson on the All-NBA first team over Giannis Antetokounmpo. People didn't like it, but I thought it made a ton of sense. Look at the arguments here for Jalen Brunson. For one, his second best player, Julius Randle, has only played 46 games out of 82 total games this particular season. So for a good amount of the year, they're without their second All-Star, and they still maintained one of the best records in the East. Not only that, but they're without OG Anunoby for a pretty substantial amount of time after they went and traded for him. Now, obviously, with those 2 guys healthy, they're a completely different team. They're much better, but they still managed to be at the top of the East with those two injuries happening, right? And we know Julius Randle is not going to come back. On the other side, Anunoby is going to be here for this team in the playoffs like we've seen over the last couple of weeks. He's been available. But still, the point that they've been able to maintain this top spot in the East and end up with the second spot in the East over a Milwaukee Bucks team that has a top two duo of Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard, alongside with Chris Middleton and a bunch of other role players who they've won championships with or won a championship with in the past. That says a lot. Then Jalen Brunson has been slightly more available than Giannis. I think he's got 3 more games played than Giannis this season, so it isn't like a ridiculously large amount of games that Jalen Brunson has this year over Giannis Antetokounmpo. But I think with their two situations taken into context, what JB's done this year has been more impressive. And I think JB just has a better narrative this season. You have to reward this type of stuff. He's brought a different level of buzz to New York City for basketball than we've seen them have in a very, very long time. Maybe since like 2013, and maybe that's a stretch. Maybe we haven't seen this Knicks buzz since the 90s or the early 2000s or whatever the case may be. But he's brought something back to the city of New York. And for that, you have to reward that with an All-NBA first-team selection. There's the narrative thing that he has over Giannis, like contrasted to how great the Knicks have been. Right now, things from Milwaukee have been pretty gloomy. Yes, they've been good. They haven't been a horrible team, but they've underwhelmed. They haven't had the best flow, not the best chemistry. We know defensively they struggled majorly the entire year. And the fact that they've gone through 3 different head coaches under a year has not been a good look at all. So for narrative reasons as well, I would put JB on that All-NBA first team over Giannis too. Now, your other question is JB or is Giannis the right guy to put Jalen Brunson on the All-NBA first team over, or should it be another guy? So let's look at other people right now who are in consideration for All-NBA first. There's SGA, so no, JB doesn't have a better argument than SGA for the first team. There's Nikola Jokic. No, he doesn't have a better case than him for the All-NBA first team. There's Luka Doncic. No, he doesn't have a better case than Luka for All-NBA first team. But there's this other guy, and his name is Jayson Tatum. And individually, Jayson Tatum has not been better than Jalen Brown at all, or Jalen Brunson at all. I would argue that this season, Jalen Brunson has been better than Jayson Tatum. Now, the Celtics have one of the best regular seasons of Celtics history this particular year, so you have to reward that. But individually, by no standard, has Jayson Tatum been better than Jalen Brunson at all. Jalen Brunson has been way better than Tatum individually this season. And like I said, if we're just taking situations into context, we have JB leading the second best team in the Eastern Conference over a plethora of teams that are lower than them right now that have more talent, while he had his second best player, his second all-star out for a good amount of the year, alongside with other major options being out for a good amount of the year. Jayson Tatum has been great. He's been playing high-level basketball, but his production has dipped a little bit relative to last season. And I get it, right? They're dealing with some more offensive options. Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday being here. Derek White is continuously stepping up in a bigger role. So his scoring numbers are going to dip, but individually, JB's been better. And I think he's got that team thing to kind of help his argument a lot more, right? He's got the point that he's kind of, I don't want to say carrying, but he's been the number one guy on a team that's been working with the kind of depleted roster for a good amount of the season. So maybe we don't have to replace Giannis with Jalen Brunson. Maybe we replace Jalen Brunson and put him in there over Jayson Tatum. Maybe that's the case, right? But I think JB has a very compelling case to be on that All-NBA first team over those two guys in Giannis and JT, two guys who a lot of us consider the top 2 players in the Eastern Conference coming into the season, or at least top 3 players in the Eastern Conference coming into this season, because there's Joel Embiid as well. But JB has a very, very compelling case for All-NBA first. I think he should be in there over at least one of those two guys, right? And there's a strong argument for putting him in there over Giannis, and a stronger argument for putting him in there over Jayson Tatum. Again, Tatum has the overall team success argument down because the Celtics have been flat out dominant. And if you have a team that's been that dominant, then you have to put their best player on that list, right? And have to put their best player as an All-NBA first team type player. But very compelling case here for JB to be on there. He has as much of a good case as both of those guys for sure. So it's not crazy for Doris Burke to say that Jalen Brunson has a strong argument for being the another representative out in the Eastern Conference for the All-NBA first team. So let's talk now about the Knicks upside once the playoffs come around. So I did that whole Miami Heat thing and talked about how they were able to dominate throughout the Eastern Conference with a roster that was without Tyler Hero. So they took a big dip offensively in having him out during the playoffs, but still made that deep run. But Could the Knicks have that same type of production, right? Are they good enough to beat teams in the Eastern Conference like the Celtics, like the Bucks? Is it actually a reality for this team to make an NBA Finals appearance quite like the Miami Heat did? It's tough. It's very tough to say right now. You do have to question how much contribution offensively are you going to get outside of Jalen Brunson? There aren't like a plethora of great shot creators outside of JB. But what I do notice is while there aren't great shot creators outside of JB, while he's not working with a lot of guys who are like elite one-on-one players in clutch situations where you can throw the ball to, even when the defense is focused on Jalen Brunson late in the game and they're throwing double teams at him, he knows how to make the right reads and he knows how to go and find guys. And those dudes do an amazing job at finishing plays. We saw it tonight. Josh Hart did a great job of finishing plays off of like Jalen Brunson double teams. Donte DiVincenzo was an amazing shot maker, not only just this game against the Bulls, but for the entirety of the season outside of Jalen Brunson double teams. So they may not have elite level shot creators, but it is in a situation where Jalen Brunson has no one around him who can put shots in the basket late in shot clock situations, because this team can stretch the floor well around JB and they have guys who can finish out plays. Very, very important stuff. Very similar to the Miami Heat when Jimmy Butler had a lot of attention put on him. He did have guys who can make shots late in shot clock situations, who can make shots outside of the three-point line, who can make timely looks in those types of situations. The same thing is applying to this Knicks team, and I think they have better shot makers than the Heat did last season. So as I said, they may not have the best second option scorers. They may not have a bunch of all-star guys around JB right now, but they do have players who, if they get the ball in their hands, can make open looks. If you're going to double JB, JB knows how to make the right decisions out of those double teams, and those guys know how to make those plays. That's one underrated part about JB's game. Yes, he is a dynamic scorer. He's one of the most dynamic point guard scorers we've seen in the league over the last couple of years. But an underrated part of his game is how he's able to make decisions out of double team situations. He is able to find guys. He's not the most elite assist guy, the most elite playmaker, but he can find guys and set them up. He had a really good play where they threw a late double team at him, I think, in the right corner today, and he made the right read to get it down to Precious Achiuwa with like a wide open layup around the rim. He can do just that, and the Knicks have guys who can finish plays and take advantage flat out. And they have great chemistry with one another. I know there are a lot of jokes about it and they have the podcast and everything, but that Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, and also Donte DiVincenzo trio and that tandem, when they're on the court together, they are great. Them having that experience together means a lot. So they know where to find each other and things of that nature. It goes a really, really long way. So I think this Knicks team could surprise a lot of people. They're also really good defensively. They have some really good point of attack defenders on the team. Miles McBride has been great defensively this year, and he's making his shots. There's obviously OG Anunoby. So they have that going for them as well. So while they're working with the lack of all-stars around JB, they do have a lot of guys who can fill out those other areas. So now we're talking about specific matchups. I think if they go meet up against a team like the Milwaukee Bucks sometime down the road in the playoffs, they could give Milwaukee a hard time. The Bucks do have, I think, a 2-3 record against them this season, or the Knicks have a 2-3 record against the Bucks this season. But 7 games, if we're talking home court advantage, right now the Bucks have nothing going for them defensively. Now, there is Patrick Beverley, and we'll see how much of a difference that's going to make when he's out there guarding Jalen Brunson in a playoff series where they have home court advantage. But I don't trust this Bucks defense enough. And we saw the Bucks' lack of defense get them knocked out in the first round last year against the Miami Heat, who, as I mentioned before, were one of the worst offensive teams in the NBA heading into the postseason. So they have less good defensive personnel than they did last year. Do we trust this Bucks defense this time around? That's a big question. Yes, they have a good offense, but there are even times where their offense doesn't look in sync. This is a Bucks team who just isn't super in sync right now. So you have an offense where guys aren't super in sync. You've got Giannis, who's kind of teetering this injury line right now. He hasn't played his last couple of games, and we'll see how healthy he is come playoff time. You have all of those things along with a lack of great defense. How much does that hurt you come playoff time? We'll have to see. Yes, I think if they match up against a team like Cleveland, they can definitely get him again this particular postseason. I think if they match up against a team like the Pacers, I like their two-way play a lot better than Indiana, even though Indiana has picked it up a little bit defensively over the last couple of weeks, especially since going out and picking up Pascal Siakam. But I like the Knicks over a lot of teams right now in the Eastern Conference. And maybe even if I don't like them over those teams, I think they have a really good chance at beating some of those teams out there in the East. Only team I don't see them getting past is the Boston Celtics. They have not been able to beat Boston or had their way against Boston this particular season. I think there's a major talent disparity that's there that I think is ultimately going to be a wall for this Knicks team. The only way the Celtics lose to the Knicks is if the Celtics beat themselves. And we've seen that happen before. So are we counting on that to happen again? We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening there. But given that Boston's been so good and they're so deep and there's so much talent all around, they're so dominant all around as well. And if they do match up in the conference finals, Boston will have home court advantage for the first two. I say the Celtics are that wall that the Knicks end up hitting. But still, this season could still end up being a year where Jalen Brunson makes an All-NBA first team and they get super deep into the Eastern Conference playoffs, potentially in the Eastern Conference finals without two all-stars on that roster. That's very, very tough stuff. Even Miami, while they weren't the most talented group, Bam Adebayo is still an all-star caliber player. Jimmy Butler is definitely an all-star caliber player, especially once the postseason hits. The Knicks, they don't have that right now. There's only one legit all-star caliber player, and that's Jalen Brunson. But I think those other guys do the other things very well, right? The other little things very well, and take advantage when opportunities are presented with them, especially when they get open looks. I think that's going to go a very long way for the Knicks. So while they're not a championship group just yet, I still think they can get really deep in the East, and that's going to set a major tone for them over the next couple of years in this Jalen Brunson era, which has been off to a red hot start.